From the furthest reaches of the universe comes the biggest mystery in the galaxy.
In true Obsidian form, the Outer Worlds DLC improves on an already satisfying base game experience. Today, we'll focus on the first of the two DLCs, Peril on Gorgon, and I'll start by saying that Peril on Gorgon is not perfect. But Peril on Gorgon does serve an important role within the context of the Outer Worlds creative development.
You certainly paint a picture, and I'm certainly intrigued.
It fuses the total gameplay experience into a deeper, more complete package. As a pilot embarking on a journey to the furthest reaches of the board's colonies, both DLCs further explore the trappings of late-stage capitalism.
On behalf of HPS, I'd like to remind you that HPS is not responsible for any damage, defacement, or unseemliness to your parcel.
Gorgon and Eridanos provide these bizarre and strangely horrific sci-fi adventures that further prove this fresh IP has earned its position at the front of Obsidian's RPG catalog.
I could probably spend years fixing this boat, stem to stern.
When DLC content is good, it can vastly improve upon the player's experience with the base game. When it's bad, it has the potential to dilute the IP.
Issuing sanitation ticket. Error! Refill printer paper.
As a fan of going into games as blind as possible, I basically just knew the gist. It's a Fallout-style game by Obsidian. My goal was to complete the main game before installing the DLC, so it wasn't until the end of the game that I realized the two directors listed at the top of the billing were Timothy Kane and Leonard Boyarsky. It all started to click. The Outer Worlds was directed by Fallout royalty.
From Obsidian, please welcome the creator and game designer of Fallout. Here are Tim Kane and Leonard Boyarsky.
It's hard to believe it's been 20 years since we made Fallout and 13 years since we last worked together at Troika.
Yeah, and it's great to be reunited on a new single-player RPG. We're very excited to reveal our brand new game and our brand new universe, The Outer Worlds. We hope you enjoy it.
I just want to say, we gotta take this job. This is the closest I ever been to starring in a serial drama. Only thing we're missing is a couple of cameras and a soundtrack.
At least this won't be boring.
And of course, we love our DLCs and complete editions at the Yeti Den, so today I want to discuss the developer's baton pass from the Outer Worlds base game team into the smaller teams leading its expansions.
There's a whole research compound left to the Sprats. I think I'm close to figuring out why, but something dangerous is closer to me. Got the job through one Minnie Ambrose. Top runger who just came into some money, was offering a hefty bid card for qualified help. Trust me, her money's good.
Before they were gaming giants, Tim Kane first met Leonard Boyarsky at Interplay Entertainment in 1997. And it was at that now defunct studio in Irvine that they developed Fallout, a post-apocalyptic RPG. The head of Interplay Entertainment, Brian Fargo, tasked the fresh-faced developers with the assignment to create a spiritual successor to his 1988 computer-based role-playing game, Wasteland. And thus, with the birth of Fallout in the wake of Fargo's Wasteland, a rich lineage of computer and console-based role-playing games was born. In a way, the Outer Worlds franchise was made possible via the failed acquisition by Troika Games. If Tim and Leonard succeeded in their bid to purchase the rights to Fallout, then the Outer Worlds wouldn't have had a reason to exist. Seemingly waiting for a call that never came, Obsidian Entertainment studio head Fergus Urquhart, alongside directors Tim Kane and Leonard Boyarsky, decided to take matters into their own hands. In other words, Fallout's new ownership at Bethesda, led by Todd Howard, wouldn't be requesting a Fallout New Vegas 2 from the development team at Obsidian anytime soon. That left Fallout's original team with the opportunity to create something entirely new.
I remember we were sitting at a company meeting and Tim Kane had like something behind his back that he wasn't showing us, and he's like, so we're meeting with publishers today and I made this, and like he just pulls out assisting him plush it. I'm like, Tim, what are you doing? He's like, don't worry, it's gonna charm them. They're gonna get it.
If you're not familiar with the Outer Worlds, it's probably the closest we'll ever get to Interplay and Obsidian's take on a Fallout New Vegas 2, or even a follow-up to Tim and Leonard's Fallout 1, which Tim Kaine prefers we all just call Fallout. The Outer Worlds was designed to support a smaller, more focused project scope, emphasizing the developer's trademark, player-led worlds filled with choice and consequences.
We're mostly known for RPGs with a lot of story and a lot of reactivity and a lot of player freedom.
Ditching the seamless open world concept of a Bethesda-style RPG for a hub-based area design philosophy, Obsidian opted to focus on its strength, storytelling. Think more Mass Effect, less Fallout 4. Even with both DLCs installed, the Outer Worlds does not take 150 hours to beat, but it does encourage its players to circle back, create a new character, and see how the world reacts to a new set of player choices. Its DLC has expanded into an opportunity for the team's narrative designers to flex their directorial muscles before moving on to larger scale, full-fledged projects.
I came to Obsidian, I worked on Tyranny, I worked on Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, I worked on the Outer Worlds, and then I worked on both of the Outer Worlds DLCs, and now I'm on the Outer Worlds sequel.
In a fireside chat between Obsidian's programmer turned narrative designer Dan McPhee and narrative design lead Kelsey Beecham, Beecham expressed her love for player-led storytelling.
I'm Kelsey Beecham, also a narrative designer, also currently working at Obsidian Entertainment. When we worked on the Outer Worlds DLC, rather than super cinematic stuff and cutscene heavy stuff, I'm more excited by games that lean into kind of player-directed storytelling.
This is a phrase I've heard from both Kaine and Boyarsky, their goal being to create the Outer Worlds in such a way that the story unravels as the player dictates the narrative via branching dialogues.
You have to, like when you're building out a conversation, go, okay, well what if the player goes here, 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 but not there? So maybe you have like 8 different routes through a conversation, you have to count for all those. It can seem like a lot of moving parts and be like, oh, you know, it can be overwhelming. Wouldn't it be so easy if there was only one route?
By developing the DLC roadmap in tandem with the game's base release, time afforded the developers at Obsidian an opportunity to expand on their game's strengths. DLC content is theoretically cheaper to produce. With a fresh coat of paint, the new content offers players an extended world, new environments, new characters to meet, and most importantly, new weapons and armor to discover. And because the tech is already built, a smaller strike team could theoretically lead a DLC development for several months before expanding to a larger sized unit.
Some studios call them pods, some call them strike teams, but it's typically like a narrative designer, an area designer, an environment artist, and maybe like a QA person, and you guys are a group and you're in charge of either a feature or an area of the game, and you're going to meet regularly and develop all the content in there.
I imagine that this is where the fun of game development really shines through. So what is Peril on Gorgon? Peril on Gorgon is the first of 2 DLC add-ons included in the Outer Worlds expansion pass, now bundled in Private Division Spacer's Choice Edition. In an Xbox Wire post written on July 30th of 2020 by Mike Dowling, the director of communications at Obsidian Entertainment, he and the team wrote that the DLC focuses on, quote, the development and synthesis of Adrenatime, a drug intended to improve the productivity of workers across the Halcyon colony. While the drug showed early promise, long-term use resulted in an alarming side effects, including heightened extroversion and creative ideation. Doesn't that sound delightful? End quote.
Do you see that glowing chunk of space rock? That's Gorgon. My birthright, my burden, and the bane of my existence.
I'd recommend brushing up on Adrenatime's combat offerings. I got to Gorgon, I was forced to pull out my bag of tricks, upgrading my weapons via the Tinker feature, carefully selecting the most effective weapons against the varying enemy types, and of course targeting the enemy's weak spots with Adrenatime. Mike Dowling continues, quote, after an expensive development cycle and several failed tests, Halcyon's favorite corporation, Spacer's Choice, shuttered the project, and the abandoned facilities became home to marauders and a motley band of sublight contractors. And that's where you come in, end quote.
Mr. Thompson told me 100 times the cannery couldn't afford spare parts for Bess. All while Spacer's Choice was building this?
Unfortunately for this first DLC, one of my critiques is that the enemy designs don't feel scary enough. Or a certain aesthetic variation to hold my interest. The Marauder design doesn't warrant that exciting sense of dread that the premise invites.
You followed an uncertain lead all the way to my doorstep. You're curious, resourceful, and perceptive. All the marks of a good private eye. Whatever happened on Gorgon wasn't Mother's fault. I simply need the evidence to prove it.
The more compelling component of the story's premise of Peril on Gorgon is through the meeting of the, quote, wealthy recluse Mini Ambrose, end quote. Peril on Gorgon features very few NPCs, so a character like Mini Ambrose is essential to the game's pacing and plot.
My mother, Dr. Olivia Ambrose, worked for Spacer's Choice at the Gorgon Research Facility. She was brilliant, the top scientist in her field, until tragedy struck.
Mike explains that Minnie, quote, reaches out to you in hopes of learning more about Dr. Olivia Ambrose, her mother, and the former head of the project. Your journey will take them through Gorgon's treacherous canyons and into its abandoned corporate facilities as you track down Dr. Ambrose's scattered, embittered colleagues and uncover a mystery that has shaped life in Halcyon, end quote. As far as what the DLC offers to players, Obsidian writes, if you're going to experience a new storyline on a new asteroid, it's only right to equip you with some sweet new science weapons, end quote.
Did I not mention that? Right, sorry. He's got a rocket launcher.
They add that, quote, and what would the Outer Worlds be without perks and flaws? Well, we're adding more of those too, plus new armor sets and variations so you can get a whole character build that looks and plays in totally new ways, end quote. The development of Peril on Gorgon began in January of 2019 before the Outer Worlds base game launched on October 25th, 2019.
The game came out, we needed to make 2 DLCs basically at the same time, slightly staggered. So the main team was making Peril on Gorgon, and then they asked if I could basically start up a small team with about 7 people to get the foundation going for Gorgon and Eridanos so that we could be far enough along that when Peril on Gorgon came out, we could like finish up the second DLC.
With the critical reception of the game being positive and fans enjoying the original IP, the developers decided to scrap their ideas for their DLC plans and turn the first DLC add-on into a larger expansion. Reading fan feedback and listening to the developers, I've kind of read between the lines, coming to the conclusion that this DLC is essential to the game's foundation more than it is an entirely separate expansion of the base game. The desire for the development was to walk players through a key environment while providing background information on the state of affairs in Halcyon, particularly focusing on the development of the drug Adrenatime and how its distribution affected the colonies. If you want to get the most impactful outcome from the story, then the companions to bring along are Felix and Parvati. Instinctively, I chose to stick with Parvati and Ellie because I enjoy their emotional dichotomy and how they bounce off each other's polar opposite personalities. Peril on Gorgon was directed by Carrie Patel. Prior to directing the DLC, Patel's game development credits were based in the narrative design focus at Obsidian Entertainment. At the time of the expansion, Patel was a 7-year vet of the studio. Patel previously worked on projects like the Pillars of Eternity franchise, as well as the base game of the Outer Worlds. Going from a narrative design lead to the game director meant taking on the creative leadership responsibilities of the project's overall scope and vision.
Huh? I smell they come! Attack! I'll fix you right up!
In order for the DLC to succeed, Patel would need to manage the resources while driving the vision of the game forward. Her observation was that as a team lead, you're used to getting answers up the chain, but as the game's director, she'd catch herself thinking, quote, someone needs to make the decision only to remember that, oh, that's me now. Besides the Xbox wire post and the trailer, the PR of Peril on Gorgon was pretty tight-lipped. The messaging mostly stuck to key talking points, creating a very succinct narrative for the add-on package. The team might have been aware that Eridanos carried the weightier narrative experience and didn't want to over-promise and under-deliver with Gorgon. Gorgon is a DLC that fits neatly into a first-time player experience, but it struggles to impress those of us who played it right after beating the game. On the Iron Lords podcast, King David explained how he lacked the right point of no return save file, forcing him to replay the game right after beating it just to experience Gorgon. And that was a disappointment for him.
I was already past the point where I can actually access it.
Oh, you was dealing with the Phineas situation.
I was literally so frustrated. I was so upset. I was really pissed off because I had to start my character fresh. And I was really upset. So this time when I went in, they had a prompt that told you, we can take you back from this part right here. And I think that's great fan service because they listen to the fans, they listen to the gripe, they listen to the problem, and they fix it immediately. So I was immediately able to jump into the new DLC. Nice. So anybody that's worrying about that part right there, you don't have to worry about that.
So you're saying they gave you a rewind button?
Well, yeah, you know what? Because it's definitely necessary for individuals that's ignorant like myself. That, I mean, because I found out that I was probably in a very minute minority in doing so, just playing the game on one save and getting
to be fair, they tell you like 8 times, there's no return after this.
But they didn't tell you there's no return for your DLC.
That's true. That is true. Okay, you're right.
But they fixed it though. I don't care about anything else, but other than it fixing it.
Luckily for me, I had the point of no return save, so Gorgon did not enrage me, but it also didn't blow me away. That being said, I am all for this kind of DLC content, and I think it will make for a great addition into my second playthrough of The Outer Worlds, where it will serve more of its intended purpose by fleshing out existing locations and adding more science weapon skills and flaws, and most of all deepening the lore of Halcyon. Kerry Patel told RPG Site that, quote, one of the cool things about The Outer Worlds being set in its own solar system is that there is plenty of room both in that system and also in the lore to find new nooks and crannies to explore in a DLC like this. Part of the inspiration came from Kate Dollarhide, the other narrative co-lead on the project, and we identified pieces of the lore that we knew as developers, but that we didn't fully flesh out in the base game, end quote. Peril on Gorgon takes players in the same asteroid field as Cilia, on an asteroid called Gorgon. The crew of the Unreliable are summoned into a pulp noir adventure into the mysteriously opaque abandoned research facility hidden by Spacer's Choice inside of the asteroid field. The core narrative premise is compelling. I just wish that there had been more to Gorgon to deliver on its sense of intrigue. If you haven't played Peril on Gorgon and you are more familiar with the DLC of Fallout New Vegas, I'd say that this story add-on reminds me a bit of Fallout New Vegas's Old World Blues and Dead Money. Gorgon has that noir sci-fi horror element to it with a general sense of loneliness due to an experiment site gone wrong. Similarly, Old World Blues lacks a rounded out cast of humans to converse with, but sticks out as being even more strange and bizarre than what Obsidian managed with Gorgon. Dead Money is another DLC that had this amazing concept but lacks some of the vitality I was looking for in a tighter narrative DLC. Kerry Patel told GamesRadar that she wanted to, quote, dig into Halcyon's underlying problems. Patel added that the focus was to discover more about how the corporations failed the colony. The audio logs and the notes, as well as the environmental storytelling on Gorgon, do a great job of showcasing the asteroid's state of decay and how that might spread through the colonies. Operating in the defunct base allows the player a bit of freedom to determine how they react to the moral questions that arise in the development of Gorgon's story. There are several moments where Gorgon delivers on the horror elements of the DLC, and it makes me excited for the sequel, where hopefully the team will explore even creepier quest lines while examining the underbelly of some of these seedy corporations. The project's art designer, Matt Hansen, describes the Gorgon Overlands location as, quote, this labyrinth spiderweb of canyons and caves that make up the surface of the Gorgon asteroid where these facilities are housed, end quote. The Gorgon content and off-world is roughly the size and scope of a Monarch. Hansen led the dev team in tackling the verticality of Gorgon. they listed Skyrim and Breath of the Wild as inspiration for drawing the player's eye towards geographical points of interest. Unfortunately, the exterior of Gorgon features a muted color palette that makes it difficult to enjoy exploring. In this way, it kind of reminds me of Alan Wake 1. In Gorgon's case, there was a charm missing from the overland world.
This rock ain't much to look at, but it's our rock.
It seems like the team's creative aspirations were hamstrung by their story and location concept. The concept had to be constrained due to the limitations of the overarching base game narrative. The development of Gorgon did set up Obsidian to knock the next DLC, Murder on Eridanos, out of the park. Watching the press and interviews for the second DLC revealed a more comfortable and confident Obsidian. In Gorgon, prior to its demise, Spacer's Choice once treated the asteroid with bright eyes for their facility filled with commercial promise. Tim Kaine described the joy of the Outer Worlds as happening now, as in late-stage capitalism is crumbling before our eyes, compared to Fallout, where the world basically fell apart and the player is uncovering the remains of a fallen society. Unfortunately, Gorgon suffers from a bit of the same dystopian dreariness made famous by BioShock and Fallout. Gorgon produces a sense of loneliness in an environment overrun with enemies. The gameplay becomes too absorbed in the canyon to create emptiness. With the second DLC, Eridanos, the team takes on more of a BioShock Infinite approach, drawing you into a present, colorful environment, while giving the player a front row seat to the dystopian society's explosion in all of its wonder before the fall. The size of Gorgon does lend itself to some pretty fun audio log fetch quests, but it can also lead to some disappointing moments of silence. I love extensive DLCs like Fallout 3's Point Lookout and The Witcher's Blood and Wine and the Outer Worlds' own Murder on Eridanos, but Peril on Gorgon almost gets there. The premise is strong, the size of the environment is substantial, but the DLC falls short visually. Gorgon walked so Eridanos could fly. If you love lore and adding deeper layers of understanding to the colonies of the Outer Worlds, then you'll get more depth if you play both DLCs. If you had to play one, I think the easy choice is Eridanos. Best case scenario is that you play the game while both DLCs are installed, because then you'll have this content readily available as your character levels up through your first playthrough. That's all the time we have today. I love the extra layers of immersion that Gorgon adds to the Outer Worlds. I wish that the art style and environment could have served the story in a more interesting way. Let me know your thoughts on the first DLC of the Outer Worlds. I will talk to you all next time. Bye.